All right, so I said earlier, my name's Kyle Houchins. I'm a tech and a trainer for McNeil. I also run a small consultancy called the Outside Digital Art and Design. This is Getting Started Rhino for Windows. And today we are going to build this little camp stove. And so there's a couple of challenges about this particular sketch. First of all, it's a terrible sketch, but second of all, it's also in perspective. So it doesn't have any orthogonal reference in order for us to be able to work from. So we have to make some inferences and some assumptions about how this thing is going to work. And so instead of a typical build where you would actually put the image in the scene and then work over it, this is probably going to be something where this gets tucked off in a corner and we use it as reference and try to kind of, figure out what we want to do or where we want to go. Now we can do a few things here. Like we could basically assume, what the diameter of this circle is, by picking side to side. And so that might be useful. And we could set the general proportion of what this torus needs to look like, which also may be useful. And then we can drag a line down here and get a general sense of how long this is based on how much there is, we scale this image. So let's back up a second and talk about how do we get this image in the first place. We were going to run the picture command. We're going to go to the desktop and find it, double click on it, and then drag it and just plop it into the scene, right? So it comes in scaled, it comes in locked aspect ratio, and you can move it, you can rotate it, you can scale it, you can do whatever you want to it as far as manipulating this thing to your needs. But the most useful aspect of it will probably be just pulling some basic dimensions off here. And if I figure that this thing is supposed to be kind of a backpacking, camping kind of, thing. So I figure that this internal ring here probably should be about 2¼ inches. And if I hide this for the time being, and I go to the top view, and let's just work in the top view for the time being, and I say, I come over here and I grab a torus and I set the point at 0. And let's say I want the diameter of this entire thing to be about 2¼ inches, right? So we know that the original diameter on this thing is going to be about 2¼ inches, and then we're going to kind of eyeball the proportions because we're working off of that sketch and say it's probably going to be something like that. Now that I have this placed in the scene, if I bring back my image and I go to the front view, I can see that my image is just massively out of scale. So what I'm going to do is shift drag on the scale handle, and I'm going to just bring this image down so that it's approximately the same size. And I have to make some, assumptions like here's the edge and here's the edge. So we're going to keep coming down and say something. If I were to even go so far as to draw some guidelines off of this thing that I could scale to, and maybe I even hold down control and move my gumball to here, like that, then I can scale from the center of this thing and I can say, okay, it's going to be about there, and I got to move it back in space because it's hiding my lines. And I'm going to just drag this out a little bit bigger. So I'm going to say, okay, that is, I'm kind of hitting, see how I'm kind of hitting right here and I'm kind of hitting right here. So I'm going to say that that is about the scale that I want this drawing. Now, I'm going to take this drawing now and I'm going to just kind of slide it back in space for the time being so that it's outside my modeling window. Because as we saw earlier, what I don't want is this, right? I don't want it to bisect my model and hide half of my stuff and make it so that it's difficult to work with. So I'm going to stick it back here in space. If I go to the front view, it's still usable, so to speak. Maybe I even want to do something like this where I locate it kind of half and half so I can kind of, find my way through this thing. And it looks to me like this torus might be just a bit skinny, right? I might want to make this a little bit fatter. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another one at 0 with a 2.25 diameter radius. And then I'm going to go to the front view. Got to do it over here. And then I can compare and say, okay, well, I want it to be a little chunkier. and I'm going to say that, and that's okay. So then I'm going to lock my image because I don't want it to move. Skip the step. Make a new layer for the image. Drop it here, and then I'm going to lock it so that I can turn it on and off with the layer manager. Okay. So let's go find that other torus. So I'm going to drag select everything, and then I'm going to control click the outside one, and then just delete the inside one. All right. So that gives me a new torus, and I feel like that matches our proportion a little bit better. And so now I need to kind of say, how long is this thing? And I can just guesstimate and say, okay, it kind of goes from here to here. And how long is that? I can do that with dimension, line length, and curve length dimension. And we're going to do this curve, and we're going to just drop this here. So it's about 3.92 inches, and that's kind of an awkward length. So I'm going to just call it an even 4 and go from there. So I also know, so if I go 4 inches long, and then let's say, well, how big is this in this dimension? And the nice thing about this curve length is it allows you to get a non-oriented view, and you can see how long something is. So in this case, 1.22. Let's call it 1.25 inches, just for argument's sake. So we know our basic dimension here is going to be 1.25 inches high by about 4 inches long. So let's go ahead and just draw that out. And if we start drafting at the center, and let's say we want to work from the center of this. Now, in order to pull a center off of this, I have to look for the seam, which is the heavy part of this. And I really want to work off the right side of this thing, so I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees by clicking and just entering the info. I could also use the surf seam command, which rolls that seam over, or rolls the seam over, sorry. But I'm just going to rotate it. It makes it easier. So now I actually have an edge here that I can select, which means I can use my O snaps to find the center of that. And I'm going to say we want this diameter to be 1.25 inches, right? So that's our overall height on this thing. And then we set about 4 inches end to end. I'm going to actually just do it 4 inches from the quad, which is there, and see how that proportionally feels. And then I'm going to do 1.25, hold down shift, and then I'm going to come back here and snap to the quad. And I'm going to look at this and say, okay, am I happy with this proportion? Does this kind of feel like what I want? Is it too long, too short, too fat, too tall, whatever? And I think that generally speaking, I think this is probably okay, although I think I do want to push this out maybe another 1/4 inch. So I'm going to say negative 0.25 and get that out there. Now, how did I do that? I shift control drag, because this is a polycurve, right? So if I pick the entire thing, it's got a couple of curves that are joined together in a polycurve. If I shift control drag just the end of that, that's what's called a sub-object selection. We're going to talk a lot about sub-object selections as we go forward, but what this allows you to do, that shift control allows you to pick a component of a polycurve or a polysurface and move just that surface. So once we have that selected, using shift control drag, I can click on an arrow and then say negative 0.25 or negative 5 or whatever I want, and it moves precisely in that direction, right? So we're about 4 1/4, and that feels a little better to me. So then I'm going to kind of say, well, how far am I kind of here? So I'm going to go back to my curve length. And this is kind of, this is kind of an ish process. This isn't something that's like super precise. We're just trying to get a general feel, right? It's like if you're in a life drawing class and you're trying to get proportions, and you hold your brush out in front of you and you use your thumb to mark off a section and then mark it back on your page. I don't know if you've ever done that. Do they even teach life drawing anymore? But this is, we're kind of just doing form finding. We're trying to like draft this out and figure out how we turn this 3/4 sketch into something that we can work with. And so 0.76 is really close to 0.75. So I'm going to just go ahead and say 0.75 is where I want to go. And I'm going to just draw right on top of what I did before. And then I'm going to come up here and say, you know, that feels about right. And then I'm going to come over here and just lay that on top. Now, I look at this, and this to me actually feels longer than this in this sketch. So I'm going to just drag it out a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of weight to that. And then I'm going to drag select this and just delete it because I don't need that additional piece. I just used it to establish the distance. Does that make sense? Everybody still with me? Have I freaked anybody out just yet? Now, this also looks to me like it has a little bit of a step in it. And I say this like, I don't know who designed the sketch. Well, it has a step in the bottom of it because I'm the one that did the sketch. So I know that's what it does. So I'm going to actually just put that in here like this. And so I've got the general shape of what I'm looking for. And then the last thing I need to do is just, I'm going to pull this out a little farther. I'm going to add this internal little chase that runs around here. See how this comes up and then comes around and then wraps around and peels out. And I'm going to do that with a center radius circle, and I'm going to shift drag and snap it to there. And so I want to, you know, keep this even, and you can see that I missed down here. So I'm going to actually move my gumball using relocate gumball, and I'm going to snap it to there, and then I'm going to start dragging up and then snap that using my O snaps, and it looks like it missed. So let's get it right on there. And so now I know I've lined all of this up. This is a little short, so I'm just going to grab this point and pull it. We're not dealing with super precise stuff here just yet, so I can do a little bit of eyeballing, and then I have to say, okay, does this feel about right? Does that feel about right? You know, does this angle feel right? And I know I pulled this out at one point, but I think I might sneak it back just a little bit more, just to get that feeling a little better. And I'm shift control clicking and shift control dragging to get the subcomponents of that thing done. So hang on, I'm going to mute a second, clear my voice again. It's morning for me here in Seattle, so it takes a while for my voice to get up and rolling. So, all right. So we've got our basics in here, and so, you know, this is a symmetrical object. I think we can infer just about everything else that we need to infer from the sketch for now. So I'm going to just hide this thing so we don't have to deal with it. It's one of the nice things about having it on a layer, and then I can come in and start trying to figure out like how am I going to work with this, right? And there's a cool tool. If I drag select all of this stuff and I pull up the curve boolean tool, it allows me to actually go through and pick areas that I want to keep, right? And if I click outside, it's going to click everything. And if I start clicking and adding some stuff, I can, you know, do this kind of thing. Now, the problem is if I run this, right, I get my exterior, but I lose all of my interior stuff. So that's not going to be super useful. Curve Boolean is a really awesome tool, but in this case, it's not super ideal. So let's just do standard trim. So I'm going to just drag select everything. I'm going to trim, and then let's just start happily clicking along. And I'm going to go ahead and trim out this and this and that. And I think that gives me everything I need to do in order to pull this off. And I click trim off these ends too. All right. And so that gives us kind of our doodad shape. And we've got some decisions to make. There's always a point where when you're modeling, you have to decide, do you build the model with sharp corners and then fillet the surfaces later? Or do you build the curves with fillets in them and have the surfaces be filleted to start with? I'm about 50-50 on that argument, to be honest with you. I go back and forth all the time, and I you know, sometimes in things like this where there is like a real drafting mechanical element, I will actually stick with this style and do everything sharp and fillet later, because what that allows me to do is to sub-object select things and push and pull faces, right? This is a degree 1 object where everything has just got 2 control points, right? So what I can do is I can push and pull these faces and the model updates without any distortion. Whereas if there was any degree 3 information in here and I pulled it, you would get all sorts of crazy isoparams and stuff. So when you work with basic shapes like this, you can do all sorts of stuff like this, where you're just making modifications to the basics and then go back and fill out this stuff later. And so I think that's probably what I'm going to do here. And I may actually do this thing in 2 pieces, or I may actually do it in 1 piece and then split it up. And I think that's probably what I'm going to do in this case, is do it in 1 piece and then split it up later. So let's go ahead and grab all of this stuff. Let's do curve Boolean now. And I'm going to click outside of this, and I'm going to not delete anything. And that's going to give me a new curve, right? If I hide everything, that's just my exterior shape. And the way I hid everything there, other than what I picked, is using the isolate command. I have a hotkey set up for it. So let's go ahead and make this planar. We got a planar surface. And then let's bring our curves back, and then we can split this object with these curves. And I'll just go ahead and do that. And so now we've got 2 pieces. Now the cool thing about this is I can actually join these things back together into a poly surface, and they stay as their individual pieces. If I shift control click this, or if I shift control click that, I can get those 2 individual pieces, which is useful. But if I extrude it, right, I get these individual objects that are then able to be dealt with. And I can do things like shift control click this. Actually, there's a surface in there. And then I can scale this. Got my original poly surface, got to get rid of that. I can scale this and get my little offset. And then if I'm happy with that, I can Boolean the thing together. But I think I'm going to hold off on that for the time being. I think I'm gonna do a few more things before I start getting into that. So the one thing, if we go back to our sketch, the one feature I wanted to have on this is I want all of these little things to be able to rotate straight up so that it collapses onto itself and you know, is easier to carry and all that kind of stuff. So so in order to do that, I'm assuming that there's some sort of gasket or something in here that's going to create some magical seal between this little gas ring and allow the gas to come out through these little things out here and get our little flames and all that stuff, right? So one of the things of making a convincing concept is to have the mechanism be believable, right? If you've got a headlight on a car, it has to be connected to the car. It can't just be floating out there in space somewhere, right? That's not believable unless there's some sort of, you know, magnetic blue levitation light thing that holds it up in space or something like that, right? There's got to be a mechanical explanation that makes sense in order for the concept to have a sense of believability and to pull us out of the uncanny valley, which is something that looks right, but it's not right, and your brain doesn't like it, and so it feels bad. You know, if you saw the Polar Express, the characters in Polar Express are like a classic example of the uncanny valley because they're human characters, but they're not human enough, so they feel creepy. And so you want to stay out of the uncanny valley with anything that you do in 3D. So you want to make sure that the stuff makes sense from a mechanical point of view. So in order to have this thing rotate, we're going to assume that this has some sort of gasket or some sort of joint or something in here. So in order to make that, I'm going to isolate down to these 2 pieces. And actually, I'm not, because we have to get this in the center right now. See how when I extruded it, it's extruded out from the center? So I'm going to just pull this down and snap it to the quad to put it back where it needs to be. And let's make sure that that is lined up. It's not, so let's get it there. I'm going to snap it to there, and I'm going to put it back where I found it. Actually, I'm not going to do it that way. Let's do it like this. I'm going to relocate the gumball to the midpoint, and then I'm going to just snap it down to there. That way we can see that it's lined up, and when I do it symmetrically, it'll go from there. If your gumball's not behaving like mine, by the way, right click or just left click on the gumball bunny tail here and set your gumball to snappy dragging. I think by default it might be smooth dragging. I know it was default. They may have changed that to snappy dragging, but if it's not set to that, set it to snappy dragging, and then that allows your gumball to respect your O snaps. You'll also notice down here that I run my O snaps disabled. And that seems counterintuitive, except for the fact that the Alt key is the toggle for that. So if I hold down the Alt key, it enables the snaps and allows me to use my gumball to snap it to things, which is super, super useful. But when it's not enabled, when I don't hold down the Alt key, it moves freely and it's not snapping to anything, which I also find super useful because the O snaps are not in the way. All right. So now that we've aligned that, let's go back here and take a peek at it, and let's go ahead and make our Boolean. I'm just going to subtract from this using this, and I'm not going to delete my inputs. And this gives me this center section. Now, the thing that you'll notice is because the object that I used to do the Boolean had a seam right here, look what we've got. We've got two surfaces here, which aren't ideal. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm just going to loft it back together because I want one surface. I don't want two surfaces in there. So now I've got one surface. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to scale it out just a little bit, and then I'm going to use solid offset, and I'm going to use this outward direction. And a 1/4 inch is probably big, so let's go 0.15 and just take a peek. And I want my corners to be sharp, and that's way too big. So let's go 0.08. That's reasonable, right? If that was some sort of gasket or some sort, right? So I'm going to Boolean subtract from this using this, and then check and make sure there's nothing left inside of there. It looks like my Boolean failed, so I'm going to just scale this just a tiny hair. See how those were coplanar? See this edge right here is coplanar with that surface. That's not a great Boolean setup, so I'm going to just scale it microscopically and then difference that from this, and then it worked. Now, because I scaled it down a little bit, that means this and this don't fit anymore. So let's go back and put that back together. So I'm going to difference from this using this. Now those fit, right? And if we were going to print this, we would have to add a little bit of clearance in there. And there's bunch of different ways to do that. But for now, let's just assume that life is good, all right? And now we have to look at this overall and say, okay, are we happy with the proportions on this? Is the width okay? Is the length okay? All that kind of stuff, because we're going to start getting into it a bit now. So we've got our object set up, and we've got our arm set up, and so now we can start detailing this thing. And because this thing is just, you know, is radially symmetrical, we can just copy this once we get it made. So I'm going to go ahead and Boolean these two things together. And then I'm going to leave this one as a separate piece because it would be a separate piece. I'm imagining this is one thing that's kind of machined out of aluminum and goes from there. And so we can start doing things like we can start punching our holes in here. We can start adding our little details on it. We can start doing all this kind of stuff. So I'm going to isolate so that I'm looking at just that. And my sketch has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these things. And I want to show you a cool trick. I'm going to just, let's see, I'm going to snap to the edge of this thing to start with. There's a command I learned about. I've been doing Rhino forever. I've been doing Rhino for like no joke, like 20 years. And so I just found out about this trick the other day, and I thought it was so cool. So let's go ahead and pipe this thing, and I'm going to pipe it with round cabs, and that gives me that little detail, right? So now I'm going to just grab this thing, and I'm going to tap Alt and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And everybody's rolling their eyes going, wow, the spacing on that is absolutely positively terrible. And you're right, because I just eyeballed it. But I can grab all of this stuff and I can say distribute, and I want the distribute to be in the x-axis, and check that out. It just goes and evens them all out, puts it right where I wanted it to be. Now there was a little history update here which I didn't like, so I'm going to undo it. I'm going to kill history with a hotkey, and then I'm going to run distribute again. And I want it in the x-axis. Looks like there's a curve in there that I didn't want, so let's get rid of the curve. Run it again. Along the x, and it just evens everything out. It just takes the end and the beginning, and then it mushes them in the middle, right? I thought that was cool. I was like, man, I haven't seen that before. So we're going to take this and we're going to mirror it over. And then we're going to take all this and Boolean these together. And that gives us our little detail. And then let's do the cutouts on the end. And those look to me like, it looks to me in my caffeine-addled Charles Schultz style wiggly hand drawing here that that I was intending these to be square notches as opposed to round. So let's just go ahead and draw those, but I'm going to draw them with a rounded corner. And I may be breaking my own rule here by adding the fillets in this point, and it also looks like they were intended to be a little bit smaller. So let's do that. And then I'm going to do another trick where I'm going to mirror it around the midpoint, and then check this out. Here's a new one. I'm going to move. Let's see. I'm going to copy this first. I'm trying to drop as much knowledge on here as I can possibly do, right? And so the point to move from is going to be the center of this thing, right there. And the point to move to, I'm going to type between. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, fine, what's the first point that you're going to move from? It's going to be here. And check this out. That's the second one, which means it dropped it right in the center, and history screwed me over. So let's get rid of that. Update history, kill the history, and we're going to pick this. I'm going to suspend history for the time being. Copy, paste. Now I'm going to move it from the center. And I'm going to do between here and here. So I know that this is right smack dab in the center between those two. Cool? Have you seen that before? By the way, these are intended to be interactive. So if I do something and you're like, whoa, what was that? Hit the chat, let me know, and we'll go from there. And I think actually I'm going to change my mind on this. I think I'm going to, instead of adding the fillets on this, I'm going to do these with just squares. I don't think I want to have the fillets in this, so I'm going to just take them out. And the reason for that is I may want to do some different filleting later, so I'm going to do this over. So if you missed it the first time, here it is again. Copy, paste, and then my history is going to bite me. Let's move it from the center, and I'm going to use the between switch, and it drops it right in the center of those. And then I'm going to probably use wire cut, but wire cut only allows me to use one curve at a time. So I'm going to connect these and turn them into one curve using curve Boolean. I'm going to delete everything now. And that turns it all into one curve, right? And then this makes a cutter. I'm going to wire cut through, using this curve, through this object, and it's going to go all the way through. And that gives me that. So wire cut actually works like a foam cutter. If you've used a hot wire through a foam, making foam models, that's actually how that works. And so now I've got the basics of my part. I want to put my holes in the top, and we'll do this a different way. Distribute was one cool way of doing it. we're going to do it a different way this time. I'm going to snap to the center, go here, and then I'm going to actually make this into a piece of geometry by dragging the extrude dot, holding down shift, which makes it extrude in both directions. And that is a big burner hole, so I'm going to make this smaller, like that. We'd have a bonfire going there if we use that thing. So let's do this, and then I'm going to do a linear array. Transform, array, linear, and I'm going to do, let's do 5 items, and let's start the center of this, and I'm going to shift drag out in this direction, and I don't like 5, so I'm going to come back up here and go 9. That feels better. That feels more burnery, maybe even 11. And see what Rhino's doing here? Rhino's allowing me to design on the fly, right? I'm not just CADing things. I'm not just a CAD person, right? I hate that term. Just give it to the CAD person. I'm not a CAD person. I'm a designer who uses this. Rhino is a medium. Rhino is an art material. It's like markers or paper or clay. You know, it's a design tool. It's not just something that I sit with headphones on and just bang on stuff that somebody else designed for me, even though that's actually how I've made a decent living over the years. But it's a tool, and I want you to think of it like clay or paint or paper or whatever. And I want you to use it as a design tool. And so I want you to get to the point where you can do a 3-second sketch, right? Throw it into Rhino and start actually making some stuff and designing things, right? Instead of just CADing things. Anybody can be a CAD monkey. We want to be designers. We want to be artists who do things and make cool things, right? That's why we got into this business in the first place. Okay, so we've got this cleaned up, and now we're in a position where we need to start adding the nuance to it. And it appears to me like this is rounded, and this is rounded, and that's rounded, and that's rounded. So we need to start, you know, applying that stuff. And the goal with any type of filleting operation is you want to start big to small. You don't ever want to start small and do big. We want to do big to small. So we want to think about where the biggest radiuses are. We want to put those in first, and then we do the smaller ones. What command do you use for cutting the holes? These holes up here, that was just a simple Boolean. These holes back here, that was wire cut. That was just a Boolean subtract that I did those. And if you look at them, they're actually capped with an inside because I just took that and jammed it in there and Booleaned it out. Okay, so the biggest radiuses on this thing are going to be at the bottom. They're going to be at the top and here. And one other thing, check this out. This is cool. So I'm going to put a radius on here, but if I put the radius on there, look what happens. These are closer together than here, right? So check this out. Shift Control drag, because this is a degree 1 surface. Doop. Ta-da. Look at that. I can just move this thing. And I can say that looks more like my sketch. Magic powers. Cool, huh? Now, that would not have worked if this was a compound surface. If this had, the only reason this works is because it's just flat planar surfaces, right? The second I start adding a curve to that and I do it, the whole thing goes wonky. All right, so that's one of the cool things about working in basic shapes and building up from there. So let's go ahead and throw some fillets on here, and I'm going to just go ahead and go over here and use the fillet edges tool, and I'm going to do this one and this one and this one and these little ones in here, and those are going to be my big ones, right? And we're going to use the preview to see what that looks like. Now this is obviously way too big, so I'm going to come out here and drag this handle and say something like that, and then I'm going to look at the number, and it's hard to see because it's gray on gray, but I can see it. It's point, I guess I shouldn't be so cocky, it's harder to see, 0.141. So that's kind of an odd number, so I'm going to do set all, and I'm going to do 0.14, and I'm just going to make it a more regular number, and then I'm going to preview it to see if any of that makes sense. And in this case, it kind of does, right? It kind of works, and I'm okay with that. So let's go ahead and accept that. And that's our first pass. Now the second pass is going to be the smaller fillets, and we're going to do those with a much smaller, a much smaller fillet because we want to get all of this stuff, right? So I'm going to run fillets again, and I'm going to start picking these guys, and these, and I'm just selecting, and I'm picking this and this and this. And I'm going to have to use a tiny fillet because I've got some small spaces in here. I can't just go crazy and throw a giant fillet on this thing. And so I'm going to let it run out on the edge. I'm not even going to bother trying to knock this edge off because I kind of want that sharp to look like it was almost machined. Kind of think about how this thing was made. That's another way to kind of stay out of the uncanny valley is if you build things that seem logical, right? The way that something that would actually be built, then it feels more natural. It feels more real when you design it. So let's if I were to run this right now, it's going to just make a mess, right? Blah! We don't want that. So, and that's why we use the preview. So I'm going to set all, and I'm going to do like 0.01, and I'm going to preview that. And you can see that that actually runs. And if it didn't, then I would just change the radius. But I think that's actually probably a decent choice. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And then the last thing I want to do is fillet the inside of this thing. And because I'm imagining that if this was machined out of billet aluminum, there would be a ball end mill that runs around here, right, that would make that fillet. So let's try and see what we can get in here. And that also will give us a cool opportunity for a material break or where it almost looked like if it was powder coated, where the powder coating was scratched off or something. So I'm kind of thinking ahead to that. Let's see if that'll roll. And in that case, it looks like it does. I may actually want that to be a little bigger. So let's do the set all. 3. It looks like this is starting to come apart a little bit there. So I'm going to set all 0.025. It looks like that may work. All right, so that looks cool. Let's go ahead and run with that. Now, after we do a fillet operation, we want to check show edges. And show edges in this thing, it says found 4 naked edges. The naked edges are the things that we want to pay attention to because naked edges mean that there is a hole in this model and we don't want that. So I'm going to hit the zoom button and it's going to take me right to where those were. And consequently, it's right where we thought that problem may be in the first place. And so there's a couple of different ways I can fix this. If I'm in a hurry, I'm just going to loft over them. Okay. Am I proud of this type of modeling? No, we don't like that. The proper way to fix this is to extract this surface and then untrim it and then retrim it and then rejoin it. Now, why didn't the fillet tool do that in the first place? I don't know. I'm not a coder. I'm a modeler, designer, and I've done enough of these to know how to fix it. So I'm not gonna argue with it. I'm just gonna fix it and move on. So now this is what we want, right? Closed poly surface. Once this is a closed poly surface, then you can be reasonably assured that this is something that will data transfer. You can send this to Pro E, you can send it to SolidWorks, you could print it, you could send it to a CNC, something like that, and be reasonably assured that it's going to work. Now we have to decide, like, I think usually for like a gas jet, we want a pretty sharp hole. I don't think I want a blendy hole, so I'm going to leave that sharp. And then let's bring back our other parts and see what we've got. So I think I'm going to do a little cleanup. I'm going to delete my curves, even though if this was a client job, I would have hidden them. I would have put them on a layer and I would have hidden them. So let's go ahead a little bit and think towards the rendering. And this feels fat to me. I don't know about you guys, but this feels fat to me. So I'm going to just scale it a little bit. There we go. That feels a little more like the drawing. And I'm going to go into rendered mode, and I'm going to throw a few materials on this just because I want to be able to copy it and have the materials go with me, which will save me some time going forward. So let's go to Materials tab. Let's make a paint, and I'm going to just assume this is backpacky colors. So I'm going to make this kind of a machiny gray. And let's start by just assigning this globally, and then I'm going to come back and do a metal. And let's set this to an aluminum. And then let's shift control click and start adding some bits to our selection here. Right click, and we're going to do a sub-object assignment. And what that allowed us to do is to pick pieces of a completed polysurface and add them to our selection and change the material. However, the cool thing about this is it's still a polysurface. It's still closed. It's still something that you can still print or data transfer, anything like that. So that's new in 6, is this ability to be able to do sub-object selection. And then that gives us that cool little detail in there, right? Maybe we even want to add these in here because maybe these were machined out later. I don't know. Maybe that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. We'll see. Flexible enough that we can try it, right? And if we don't like it, we can undo it. That's part of the design process. So that looks pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with that. And then what I might even want to do is add these just for realism's sake. Let's go to the top view. Shift control drag all of those guys. And then I'm going to sub-object assign this. And then that just gives me that little extra little piece of detail up there. This is kind of a fiddly little bit. So, you know, the added little details on this thing are going to be cool. And let's make a new metal. And I'm going to make this one brass. And let's just assign that here. And that's way too shiny, so I'm going to drag the polish down. No self-respecting camper would have anything that shiny in their bag. And let's make this a different metal, right? These little variations and stuff are, oops, I don't want a custom one. Let's make another one. So this is part of the process, right? Is kind of thinking about the materials and things like that. And thinking about like what this thing is going to look like when it's assembled and how the materials work together, and do the colors work? Do the brass and the bronze look good together? If not, you know, do we come up with a different one? Do we do this in stainless and we do this in titanium or whatever, right? And I think I don't like the brass, so I think I'm going to take this and say that this is some sort of titanium instead. And then I don't think I like this gasket in here, so I think I'm going to change this from bronze to, oh, let's say it's a titanium, but let's say it's a darker titanium, something like that, right? And the difference in the finishes, right, the polish of this versus the matte of this versus the slightly different matte of this is important in the realism. And the other thing that we want to do is we want to respect the fact that if there's stuff that does have fillets on it, we want to put the fillets on so that it feels realistic. If we don't have these little fillets, it tends to draw your eye to these areas where they're not on there. And then I can say, well, is this catching enough light? And I don't think so, so I'm going to add a little bit more shine to it. That feels a little better. Maybe the color is a little, I want it to be just a little different, almost like it's got a slight anodizing to it or something like that. All right, we don't want to obsess over that too much. Actually, who am I kidding? We're designers. We obsess over that stuff all the time. All right, so we've got our basic part set up here, so I can go back to my layers. I can hide my materials for now, because if I grab all of this stuff and I go to the top view and I go to transform array polar from 0 and I do 4 of these, I get that. And it took all of my materials with us. So we went from 1 part to poof model, right? So the only thing we need to do now is we need to plan out where our little fire rings are in the center, or maybe it doesn't have fire rings in the center. Maybe it just blows out through here, but I don't know. It seems to feel like it could use a few of those. And so I'm going to just draw some curves. And I'm going to do this in wireframe mode so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to rotate with the copy command from 0. And I'm going to just go 1, 2, 3. And because I did these with history, if I grab this thing and I scale it, the other ones will update, which is nice. And then I'm going to turn these into geometry because I'm going to array it. I don't want to array the curves and then have to turn it into geometry and then have to do something else to it. So I'm going to just turn this into geometry now. And we don't want it to blow through the bottom because we'd be setting the ground on fire. As much fun as that is, it's a bad idea. And then let's take these pieces and transform array. Now, did I pay attention to whether these were spaced perfectly or not? No, but could I? Yes. So let's do 4 of these. But I'm not gonna sweat it. We've got other stuff to do. All right, so let's grab these pieces. Not these. Control clicking to get rid of those, and then do a subtraction. And then let's grab this stuff again, and I'm just going to delete them. All right, so there's our basic setup. So now we just need to add the details, which is this canister and the little top on this thing and the hose. So to make the hose, I'm going to just do this with a cylinder from top view, and I'm going to say it's going to go from about here, right? And then I'm going to change my direction to none, and then I'm going to just drag this out, and then I'm going to just slide it back in space so that it intersects. And I might want this to taper just a tad, so I'm going to shift drag, control shift click for the face, and then shift drag it, and it's a little bit too long, so I'm going to just drag it down in here like that. All right, something like that feels about right. Boolean it together, add a little blend on it, and I'm going to blend this edge instead of filleting it. And the reason I'm going to blend it is because blend actually respects continuity where fillet does not. Fillet is a circular thing. It just throws a circle in there and calls it done, whereas blend actually respects the continuity and it'll give you a tangent blend in there, which I like. I like the look of these better than a radial fillet. All right, so let's make our canister. And even though that this is an orthographic drawing, or not an orthographic drawing, sorry, it's the opposite of an orthographic drawing, I can basically use it, and I'm going to drop a center line through here, and then I'm going to start drawing. These things are usually contoured at the bottom, and then I'm going to add this little lip. I'm going to bring this up like this. And because it's going to have a cap on it, I'm not going to worry too much about what this thing looks like, but it typically has a little thing like that. So there's our fuel can, and we'll have to mess with it to see whether the proportions on this are right or not. But let's go ahead and revolve this. Full circle. There we go. And so that's our fuel can. So now we need to look at it and say, okay, does that feel? It feels a little squatty to me. I don't know about you guys, but so let's go to our original curve. Let's turn the points, select some points, and I'm just going to drag these out, and history is going to help us out here. Whoa. Like I said, history should have helped us out there, but I don't know what exactly went on there. So let's grab these. There, that's better. All right, so that feels like a little bit better proportion, but it's in the wrong position. So I'm going to drag this out of here, which will break the history. And I'm going to stick it on the ground. And then I'm going to kind of pose it in my scene using this C-plane waffle. And it's going to kind of, well, let's do it back here. That way when we do our shot, we can kind of do it like this and the hose can come around. And then, and I moved it, I moved it from the grid axis and stuff, but that's not really a huge deal because it's just a simple radial part. I can work with that. So let's go here and draw our cap. And we have kind of just a cap with a flat on it, and then we've got a little knob on top. So I'm going to overdraw this a little bit, and let's come up, and then let's kind of match that. And then I'm going to come over, but I'm going to line it up with the center. And that may be, looks like I had a persistent snap on. Persistent, yep. So let's shut that off. Let's do it again. Up like that. Snap it to the center. And then let's double check and just see. I want to make sure, what I want to make sure is that I didn't do this by accident. And draw the curve like all skewed like that. And in this case, I didn't, so I'm going to revolve it. There we go. And then let's draw the piece we need. Actually, let's not even do that. Here, let's do something more fun. So we know this is lined up in the center because gumball is always bounding box center of the object. So I'm just going to snap to the end of that, which puts it right where it needs to be. And then let's do something more fun. Let's get rid of this. And then I'm going to run the cap command, which gives me a flat cap, which doesn't have that radial seam in it, which is more fun for building things. And I need to build a little separate piece on top of this. So shift control click, drag, tap alt. That breaks off a surface and makes a new piece. I'm going to position it right there. Extrude it up. This feels like it's complicated, but it's not. This is like so much gumballing, right? So much stuff that we just do that's easy. And then we'll do another cool trick, which is I'm going to draw a curve up here, center curve, rounded, and I'm going to snap it to the middle. I'm going to find the center. Because I don't have a center here, I'm going to draw a curve. I'm going to use a 3-point, go from here to here to here. Now I get a center. And the reason I didn't get a center originally is because I got rid of that radial shape and I changed it to have the flat cap, and the flat cap is just a trim surface, so it doesn't have that radial center. All right, so that's the piece. And then I'm going to use a command called split face. This is the face I'm going to split. I'm going to use a curve, which is this, and it took the poly surface, but it just broke that face off. Now that's cool, but what can I do with it? Shift control click, drag the extrude dot, insta knob. Cool, huh? And because it's a degree 1 object, I can adjust it. I can say it's bigger, smaller. I can do things like that. Actually, I don't mind that. Let's give it a little of that. It's too tall. And that gives us our little knob. So let's knock the corners off. I'm going to use blend, and that's way too big. So I'm actually going to make my life difficult and try and blend this one too, because this blend and this blend are going to collide, but that's all right. You can see how big it is. So let's come down here like this and just do teeny. So 0.013, set all, 0.0, we'll do 0.015 and see how it goes. Preview, that'll work. If these two blends collided, you'd have to make it smaller because they won't overlap, and that'll cause it to fail. So there's that. And then let's knock the corners off of this thing as well. I'm going to blend it as well. And I'm going to do a little bit bigger on that. There we go. And then we need a little nozzle on this thing in order to connect our hose to. So I'm actually going to steal this guy. Shift control drag to get both of those. Start dragging, see how it's breaking it, but if I tap alt, the plus shows up and I get that piece again. And then I'm going to take this, stick it over here, because why model something twice? We've already modeled it. We don't need to model it again. And we'll say it goes in there something like that. And let's rotate it something like that. And let's bring it out here so it shows up. Something like that. Let's double check that that all makes sense, and it does. So we'll Boolean it together. We'll blend that off. And I'm going to run into a problem, and I'll show you how to fix it. But watch this. If I blend this, I'm going to overlap this surface, and it's going to cause a problem. Oh, never mind. Rhino's like, disparage me in public, will you? Okay, never mind. If it had done that, if it had blown over this edge, then we would simply have to just go in and trim and model that by hand. All right, which is no big deal. It still gave us most of the stuff, but in this case, the blend actually worked really well. So now, here's a cool trick that I just found out. If I take this and this, and I want to make a hose between these, right? I'm going to use blend surface, which lives over here, and it's going to make a mess, and that's fine. I'm going to blend from there to here, and you can see that it makes a mess, right? And that's actually okay. I'm going to pull this out here like this, and that's too big, so I'm going to pull that in like that. And then let's make some sort of attempt to align our edges. And in case the starting point is over here, so let's kind of make it vaguely in the same direction. You can see that it just has made a big mess there, right? So, and I'm going to make that to tangency. Never mind, curvature. So let's bring everything back and see how it goes. And it looks like, you know, our hose is going up through our little flamey bits, which is not good. But the cool thing is because blend surface has history, I can do this and figure out where is the best place for that to fall. And I say, maybe that's not ideal. Maybe we move it over here like this. And then that way, when we compose our scene, it makes sense. But this looks terrible, right? We hate that. That's fine, because all we're going to do is use that as a visualization to figure out where we want that to go. Then I'm going to copy this edge and delete, and now I have a curve that I can work with. And then I can do a sweep one from here to here, and sweep one has controls in it to keep it from twisting and folding on top of itself like that. But we get all the benefits of the blending and the tangency and all that kind of stuff that we got with the blend surface. So we get a cool hose, easy. We don't have to work too hard, right? Which is the goal. All right, so we've got this thing almost done. Let's go back to rendered mode. I'm going to hide the image for now. 10:02, we're crushing it today. So I'm going to get rid of our curves. Good grief. I'm going to actually type the right thing. Cell curve, and I'm going to delete. Like I said, if I was doing this for a client, I would keep those curves on a layer, but I'm not. So, I mean, you know, you guys are friends and all, but you're not paying me, so I'm not keeping curves for you. Let's go, and I made a material already because I'm not going to get into making materials, but I made this little stainless hose material, so we're going to assign that there. That gives us this little kind of textury look. And then this top of this thing is plastic, so we're going to make that plastic, and we're going to make it black, and we're going to change the polish on it to be a little frosty, like that. Maybe we even add, and we don't do bump textures on camping stuff because it just collects dirt. And then we're going to do this. Let's do this kind of a trick little aluminum knob so it looks like it's really high quality. So I'm going to make a new one specifically for that. So let's do metal. I'm going to make it aluminum. And then I'm going to drop the polish on it because I want it to be not so polishy. And then let's assume this has got some kind of grip on it or something, like a little over molded plastic something or other. So I'm going to just use the same material we had down there. Makes that cool. And then we want a little indicator of some sort so that we know kind of where our fuel bottle is. So I'm going to go to the top view and I'm going to align this. I'm going to do a sphere and I'm going to stick it kind of right there. And then let's drag this in this view to something like that. And I want it to be vaguely lined up with this thing, right? Just from an aesthetic point of view. And I'm going to Boolean this out. Add a little material to it. So that's our little dot indicator, right? And then I'm going to put another one right here so that, like, if you were working on this thing out in the field and you wanted to know what your reference points were for how many times you've turned this, you'd know. And I did it wrong. Picked the wrong side, but that's fine. We'll just turn it. And then that way I can see, like, okay, how close am I to off, right? That's kind of the goal. And then we'll make a new material here. I'm going to do this paint and we'll do it something kind of fiery colored. So we'll say assign. And then we can talk about whether we want to add that little aluminum rib on the bottom. But since we did this all as one surface, I have to come over here and actually split this thing. So I'm going to split the surface by isocurve like that. And then we can add the aluminum to the bottom. And we've got our little setup here. And I'm just using a default environment, right? Just a studio environment. And then we can come in here and throw a ray trace at it. And it'll go through and ray trace it. Now I have a really fast machine. I've got a 20-core i9 with 32 gigs of RAM, and I'm running an RTX 5000 video card. So if you look to see, my numbers down here are moving pretty quickly. If you're on a MacBook Pro from 2015 with an old AMD card or an old NVIDIA GTX in it, you can expect those numbers to move a lot more, less efficiently. Let's use that term. I was going to say slowly, but let's say less efficiently. So my machine works very efficiently where yours may not. So one of the best pieces of advice I can give you as a professional designer, if you do this for a living, don't waste money on, don't buy junky computers. Spend money on good computers. Spend money on, way overbuy what you're going to buy for a computer, because every second you spend waiting for stuff to get done is time you're not getting paid. All right. So, if you were a race car driver, you wouldn't be like, what's the cheapest race car I can buy? You're not going to win like that. Speed costs money, how fast you want to go. So spend money on your machine. Cheap out on everything else except your chair. Expensive chair, expensive computer, cheap out on everything else. Your desk can be a wooden door on cinder blocks. I don't care, but make sure that your machine is really good. All right, so we're at 1,000 samples already. This is something that I can actually save, so I'm going to. So I'm going to bring out our render. Actually, I have this set up here already. I'm going to right click, view capture, left click, sorry, and I'm going to capture this to a file. And let's see, it's set to the viewport resolution, which is fine. And I'm going to just save this to a file. Sorry, file. Give me my preview. There we go. Now give me the file browser. There we go. People are like, how long have you been using Rhino? He said 20 years. Doesn't seem like 20 years. Seems like he doesn't know what he's doing. It only seems that way. All right. So there's our image. There's our model. The last things that we're going to do, I'm going to go to rendered mode. and I'm going to drag select everything, and I'm going to run a few checks. One of the checks I'm going to run is cell open polysurf, and it's a tool that lives way down here. It lives way down here under show edges, cell open polysurfaces. No open polysurfaces. Now that's only partially good because polysurfaces are only part of the equation. If I do cell surf, that means it's a surface that's not attached to anything, which means if I isolate those, this you can see is an open surface, so I would need to cap that. This, because we split it, is an open surface, so I'd have to join that. And when I join that, I lose my sub-object selection, so I need to go just reapply it. And then this I would need to cap. Now when I bring it back, I say cell open polysurf, nothing lights up. Cell surf, nothing lights up. The only thing that I'm suspect on, I can't remember whether I closed the bottom of this or not, and it looks like I did. Okay. So that means everything in this scene is not only closed, but it's watertight, and it's something that I could export to a printer. I could send it to Pro-E, I could send it to CATIA, I could send it to SolidWorks, I could send it to a factory overseas, and know that they're going to be able to deal with this data, at least in the rudimentary form. If it, in the case of SolidWorks or Pro-E, they'll at least be able to import it as a dumb solid and work with it, right? But if it's a Rhino user, they're going to be good to go because they can take this and just go from there. So, all right, that's about all I have for you today. Hour and 10 minutes. We did a good job staying within the schedule today. So, any other questions? Anything that you saw that you were like, what in the world are you talking about? If not, I can let you go. If you have other questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. The one thing that I did want to point out is this is our Vimeo page, Rhino Tutorials, vimeo.com Rhino. It's in the chat at the very beginning. This is where all this stuff is going to get posted. This was the skateboard we just did for the Mac. That's actually was a fun one. It's a little long, an hour and a half, but it still came out cool. A lot of stuff that's going on in Rhino, like how to use quad remesh in V7, which is cool. All right, the other one that I want to point out is our YouTube page, and that is here. This is also, if it's not in the chat, it should be. And this is where all of this stuff is going to get paid. It's going to get set up here. All of the getting started stuff is here. We did a vintage microphone, we did a big wheel, we did a skateboard, and then all of the other stuff in the past is in here. So this is a good place to find this as well. All right. One other thing that I want to plug here, Sky Greenwald is a good friend of mine. He has a website, a YouTube channel called Better Living Through CNC. He has a series in here called Primary Surfacing. If you are new to Rhino and you want to learn how to do Rhino better, this is a really, really good series to jump into. And I'm going to throw this in here so that you have it. This guy's a good dude. He's a good friend of mine. I met him at SIGGRAPH in Vancouver about 10 years ago when we were both doing T-spline stuff, and he's just a fantastic person, incredibly good modeler, and this is a really good series worth taking a look at when you're getting started. All right, other resources. Make sure people don't know about this. Make sure that you use our Learn page. Okay, level 1, level 2 manual are right here. If you want to learn it from the basics, this is where you go. This is where you do our on-demand classes. You can take our level 1 and level 2 on demand. Mary Fouget does the level 1. She's amazing. I do the level 2. And then there is a level 1 Rhino for Mac. There's an intro to Grasshopper and all this kind of stuff here. So make sure that you're doing this stuff. If you want to find out more about the getting started stuff, this is online things here. This is the getting started live. This is where you register for this stuff going forward. Okay, so it's all in here in the Learn. Also, make sure if you are not on our discourse page, please use our forum. If you've been chased off of a forum before because the people are mean, we don't tolerate that. All right, if people start getting abusive, we actually kick them off. So this tends to be a very helpful, very useful, very active group, and chances are you will find the answer that you need that's already here. And if you can't, somebody will get to you very quickly. Bob actually watches this every day, as do I and many of the other developers and stuff like that. So it's a fantastic way to keep in touch with us and see what's going on and pick up some knowledge along the way. All right. Any other questions? If not, I will let you go. Thank you for joining. It's always fun to have an audience instead of sitting here and talking to myself. So with that, I will let you go. My name is Kyle Houchins. This is Getting Started Rhino for Windows. Go make great stuff. Thanks a lot.